So welcome back to the show. I have a personal friend. I've known him for quite some time. He's now in the business world and has been for a little bit of time. We have Jason Treadwell, and Treadwell is Jason is from the south side of Chicago here with us. And welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, thanks, Butch. Glad to be here, man.
Yeah, we always been staying in touch. We started over at that gym on Western Avenue, and we had a lot of fun there. I mean, I was there for a couple of years. I think you were too,
Yeah.
and that's where our connection started. And then it somehow ended up in the business world. Even ran into you at the train station at least once, if not twice. So Jason, could you give our audience a little bit of a background on what it is you do? Because I do think you have a niche, and that's why I wanted you on here. We'll have other discussions because I think a lot of your background could do our audience some good.
Oh, great. Once again, thanks for having me, Butch.
Yeah.
I'm Jason Treadwell. I'm the president of Treadwell Consulting Group, primarily a CFO advisory firm. We cater a lot of the clientele, I'll just say, that I have serviced or do service are within the startup realm, especially like within technology, and when I say startups, these are companies that are predominantly pre-revenue, investor backed.
Yeah, Jason, I think we got cut off there for a second. Go ahead, repeat that real quick. I think for some reason we got lost connection.
Okay. Thanks again for having me, Butch.
Yep.
And Treadwell, the president from Treadwell Consulting Group. My niche of business is pretty much within the CFO advisory services, within the accounting and finance. Primarily, I work and partner with CEOs and executives of startup companies. These startup companies are all pretty much pre-revenue, investor-backed, some of which have some venture capital, some just private lending, and or just private investor funding that comes through. And so, I love this work. I've been an accountant for over 17 years now. Went to school here in Chicago, DePaul University. Left there, spent a few years in Big Four accounting, then went into industry at various other companies within like the renewable energy space and marketing space. And then quite a few years back now, over 6 years ago, started this firm just through work that I was doing. I was working as a VP of finance at another startup within the technology and renewable energy industry, and really just resolved that, hey, I really love doing this work, especially with small businesses and companies that are in high growth phase. I tend to do my best work, in those type of environments. Oftentimes there's a need for systems, there's a need for processes, as well as just some structure around the finances and financial structures for the organization. And so here we are, Treadwell Consulting Group, and we're having fun and what I'm doing. So I'm glad.
That's good. Yeah. So Jason, let's dive into what your definition of a startup is, right? Most of us may think that casually that a startup is they lose your job or you get fired or you quit your job because you're mad at your boss and you're like, that's it, I'm doing it on my own, right? That's a typical startup, right? Entrepreneurship, right? But I think your niche is a little bit more creative because I don't think you necessarily go after the mom and pop startups. Not that you couldn't help them, but you have a niche with other startups. Can you give us a little background on that?
Yeah. You know what? In some ways, I feel like I kind of just fell into that. I think I will say in the way you described startups, I guess going back to your answer, I can see why that is the case. And I mean, if you summed it up, oftentimes you can say it's somebody that's probably just on the crazy spectrum of things. And so I would like to say
entrepreneurs are a little nutty at times.
Yeah, exactly. I think you have to be. And so, but I've been fortunate, I think, whether good or bad, I've always been one to do well, especially with, I would like to say many of startups, especially those that I've worked with, are really driven by highly motivated and highly passionate visionaries, and I think the positive side of what you do with a lot of visionaries in these startups is they see the end goal, they see the vision, and they often, I think the good ones, often do a great job in rallying people around that vision and building around that vision. And so that's why, you have like the investors on one end that come in because you basically bought into the vision. You have the employees and the staff and those that come in to support and sacrifice in some way they support and they see the vision. They have a great way, not only believing it and knowing it themselves, whether ill-advised or not. They do a really great job in rallying all the support they need to push the thing forward. However, oftentimes where I think my niche has been is there's often a huge blind spot for the, these types and the typical entrepreneurs that I've worked with. And that is in the realm of, especially in finances and structure, is really having systems and processes and some form of framework around finance in order. They have the vision, they're going 500 miles an hour, and hey, I need everything to catch up. And so sometimes where you have that disconnect is often, especially when you're dealing with funding from those outside of your organization, you have to be accountable. You have to be able to provide context from a financial standpoint for that vision. And so I think in part, my definition of startups, I always start with the founder. The startup is going to basically be the result of where and who that founder is. And so I'll give them credit where it's due. These are primarily ran by visionaries. And that's where I come in at, and I found a knack for just really supporting those that have a passion and vision for what it is they're building. And it started off when I was in industry. I always just found myself in environments to where I worked alongside a founder or a CEO in this capacity, and I tend to thrive in that environment. So I really don't have a really direct answer for you with that. I think
That's right.
kind of my niche was evolved. Thankfully we've been able to grow through a lot of referrals, but even more recently, just through marketing and networking, I'm understanding that this is just a larger need across several industries when it comes to startups. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I land on startup.
Yeah. So can you walk through a little bit and just tell our audience, because I know one of the companies that we had met, we collaborated a little bit on, like there was no sales revenue, right? And so how is the perspective of a company when you're driven off of all the revenue you have, or all the money you could work with for operations is coming from revenue, and then you have companies that only have investor capital, or however you want to call it, capital from investors inside the company with no revenue coming in. So how are the two mindsets different?
Well, I started off my last part with crazy. And so I think that kind of leads over into this. But, but no, with all seriousness, I think that's where my sweet spot comes, because really where I do a lot of my work is like saying, okay, well, this is where we're going. Typically, in my experience, especially if, and depending on where you are in your fundraising, right? So if you're like seed round and things like that, these are like very, very, very early people. And this is you saying, hey, at bare minimum, this is what I need to just turn the lights on and start to do what I say I'm going to do. So, at bare minimum, it may be, the founder's salary, maybe a couple of consultants, or whatever that framework is. So you kind of really budget around that, right? Or you create a projection off of that. And then where I would come in, we set milestones. It was like, okay, well, we have like a pre-seed round. Now we want to go to seed, and as you go to these different rounds, there should be milestones that the company is growing towards. Because you're making a great point. Like, it's one thing when we have revenue, especially when it's predictable, I can kind of base the future and the growth projections based off this. At this phase, and with many of the startups, it's a very high-end, like scientific guess, so to speak, right? Because we're trying to get to sales. And so really it just comes down to aligning your dollars with your vision. That's probably the best way I can describe it. And so it is definitely a new world and a nuance, because a huge risk you have with that is, the money all hits the bank and then the founder goes and runs away with it and, lives their life as if they're already a Fortune 500 company. And I've actually seen and experienced that as well. And so,
well, we see it too, right? Like, and they usually show up on the front page of the newspaper at some point, right? Yeah.
exactly.
And they're trying to live that lifestyle, and then they're doing it. So now some of these Main Street companies, and this may be a little bit off topic, but there's companies that get to a certain level in their plateau. So they start from scratch, whatever, even through acquisition, they purchased it from their parents or purchased it from the place they were working, or they started from scratch. They get to a certain level and plateau. How does that look where instead of being a startup company going to give a venture capitalist money, is that a different game at that point where you're going to get investor money to try to move to a whole new level and expand?
Yes and no, because I mean, once again, I think the huge differentiator is you would have some form of revenue. You have not only a case study for what it is you do, but you also have like a base, right? It's at this point, and that's why you also see like it might not be venture capital, but you also see a lot of like private equity companies now. Even in my industry, you call the accounting and finance industry, where now you're seeing private equity companies are now getting into the accounting advisory space, and whether it's just to buy it, add it to their wing, or they're buying it and selling it off. But again, it's a provable model, and really all they tend to, like you said. So I think to expand, you would leverage it like you would in any other business. However, what we're looking at, what would be looked at, is much different than would be as a startup. I mean, as a startup, there's a lot of risk that's being taken up. You kind of insulate that with some of these transactions.
Got it. Yeah. So now I lost my train of thought there for a second, but so with current environments, that's where I was going. So with current times, we're kind of post-COVID, right? Kind of like it's still there, but it's not, right? And so what are you seeing from the accounting side of things with these businesses and startups? Are you still seeing innovation and money being brought to the table to get these companies moving? Or are you seeing less of it because maybe investors are a little bit stingy, maybe they're a little gun shy, especially with inflation at where it's at? Have you seen any behavior changes in the marketplace?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I would say investors and companies are still investing. I'm not as aware, and I could probably, we have me back on, I could give you some stats, but
sure. I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, right. There has been some downward trends, but I would say from a business or startup standpoint, I feel like the runway or the cash runway has shortened a little bit. So meaning like, hey, we need you to show us more throughout this process. Hey, we invested in such a way, we're interested in, hey, whereas normally we may give you, an 18-month, 24-month runway to kind of really assess where things are and to really hit that goal. We're shortening that because obviously, we want to mitigate that risk a little bit better. And so although dollars may look different, I think for the companies themselves, it's tightening up. And then as far as just an industry period, I feel like acquisition has been the way, the name of the game lately, especially for those companies that have a tremendous amount of cash and cash reserves. And so like you see in a lot of industries where you do see some pullback on the debt side of things, where there's cash, many are able to make acquisitions. And I mean, from my vantage point and the few things and industries that I'm looking into, I do see a lot of that. In times like this is the best time to, make acquisitions. There's a lot of businesses for sale, especially if you have the cash.
So with acquisitions, are you seeing that businesses are trying to diversify their book of business or their business in general? Or are you seeing that they're acquiring companies that are aligning with the original product?
Oh, that's a great question. And so even when I think about the account, like I've been doing a lot of just researching through the accounting industry, for instance.
Sure.
I'm seeing a bit of both. Where you're seeing other service companies are acquiring advisory and service accounting firms and to expand their practice. And then in other ways, you'll see some firms where they're merging and they're in a way diversifying their practice, but really just consolidating in one way and really just like combining forces. So it's like, hey, we were great standard issue accounting firm. We handle compliance, we handle audits and things like that. But you're seeing a rise in like advisory and advisory services, kind of like the conversation we had for today's podcast.
Yeah.
Like we were just talking about just how the evolution of advisory. Yep. And so I think that's a driver I'm seeing, at least, especially like in different industries.
No, this has definitely been great. I think we'll have you on here shortly and we'll get a dive into some specific topics and try to help some of these startup companies that, sure, they're mainstream companies that could go out and get venture capital money, as well as just these startups. Technology is obviously a growing space and other industries, but we'll get you on and maybe we'll talk more about it. I appreciate your time today, Jason.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, thank you.